Good day, everybody. Welcome to Fentanyl, the Frontline Briefing, Fentanyl on the Frontline, the podcast where we equip those on the edge with mission critical insights. I'm Connor with Honor. I'm retired LAPD, motor officer, DRE instructor. I draw from 2 decades of crisis calls to bring you unfiltered field wisdom. And we have Dr. Levy here as well, our host. She's fantastic. Chief Learning Officer at Z School with her doctorate in business administration, global executive training expertise, and peer-reviewed research on transformative public safety programs. Dr. Levy is prime mover in opioid awareness, leading initiatives like operational readiness for police officers, the OUD course that arms responders with de-escalation, overdose intervention, and of course the care model to turn crises into connections. And today, very excited to announce we're joined by Mayor Neill Clark of Sparta Township, New Jersey, a 25-plus-year antitrust attorney, co-founder of Sparta Responsible Development, protecting against suburban threats, former deputy mayor and current leader who's repelled 21 stories for environmental causes. Mayor Clark, thanks for bringing your small town grit to the fentanyl fight. Give us a little bit of background about yourself, and again, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, and I appreciate Dr. Levy and Connor for having me. So, my origin story, as they call it, I guess, in politics, how did you wind up being a mayor of a small town? Really had to do with I've only been in Sparta for 7 years, and kind of like anyone with a who fought, the story is I wound up there chasing a woman who's now my wife. I was I was from the Philadelphia area, and I was living nearby in a town called Milford. Was preparing to move back, and a buddy of mine said, "Hey, don't move back. I got a girl you got to meet." And so he introduced me to my wife, and so that's how I wound up staying in Sparta. And I'd been in Sparta for a few years, and I looked at the newspaper one day, and there was a proposal for a 900,000 square foot distribution warehouse in our kind of small rural town. And I said, well, that sounds strange. And anyway, I looked at the land use meeting and saw that there was an attorney there asking questions. He was doing a very good job. And so I reached out to him, and we began a fight against this large distribution warehouse in our town, which inevitably led to, it's still ongoing as we speak. That led to, hey, why don't you run for office? And because you've been leading this effort to protect our town. And so in 2020, I ran for town council along with two other gentlemen on a kind of no warehouse platform. And we won with over, I think we had 67% of the vote. And so we kind of latched on to a local issue, and we're able to take that to success to office. So now it's 2025. I'm in my third year. If I decide to run again, it would be in 2026. But that's how I wound up as being a mayor in a small town. Not something that I had, as they say on my bingo card a few years ago.
Wow. It wasn't even on your radar, huh?
No, not at all.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And so what transpired following looking at that warehouse and seeing what was the story, the journey following that?
So
to tie it together.
Sure. Well, part of it, I have public service is sort of in my DNA. My grandfather was a council person in Hickory, North Carolina for over 35 years. So Hickory's a little bit bigger than Sparta, but a life of service. So that I think was always there. It's just the opportunity didn't present itself until 2022. But once I became mayor, there's a million other issues besides land use and the warehouse issue. Now I've gotten a very good relationship with our police force because that is sort of our topic about addiction and the fentanyl opioid crisis. That's something that every township now receives opioid funds. And so we have to decide how to spend that. So I'm involved in that. I'm involved in, simple things as, passing ordinances to, curb, say, short-term rentals, which have been a problem. So you really become sort of boots on the ground about people's lives every day. What is affecting them each and every day? And the benefit of being a local municipal leader is you can do something about that. Whereas I think a lot of dissatisfaction with politics comes with, at the national level, is people don't feel like they're responsive to their own needs. And part of that is just by design. Like, local government is probably going to affect your life much more than the national level. Your taxes, your roads, your schools, your local ordinances, whether you want to build a deck on your house or not, that's all local. And so I've been able to get really involved in different efforts, but you really feel like you impact people on a day-to-day basis.
That's true. That's true.
Mhm.
From your experience, what do you believe? Obviously, we're here to talk a little bit further about fentanyl and the
Mhm.
crisis at hand, and how, in generally speaking, as a mayor, you're in charge of all these different things, as you mentioned, from ordinances to zoning and all these kinds of uh, situations. From your experience, what what do you believe people in the community often understand or misunderstand about the struggle with addiction and fighting the fentanyl crisis on the front line within your own community and experience?
I think a lot of people may misunderstand. They think addiction is a choice. And it maybe starts out as a choice, right? When you take your first hit or that was a choice. But if you're on the deep throes of addiction, you've lost that ability to choose a long time ago. And
Yeah.
so where we come in as a municipality, and some people may misunderstand that they think the response is, well, there has to be consequences. We have to penalize. And that will show the addict what to do. Well, thankfully, that approach has now been is no longer in favor. And we look at the trying to, as they say, harm reduction. And I think the people are starting to accept that approach. I think early on there was a kind of punitive approach to addiction. Now, because everyone has at least someone in their lives that they know that has been affected by addiction, particularly even the opioid crisis. And so that, I think, has humanized it for people. And so they take a less punitive approach than they used to. But initially, I think that was the misconception that folks had, is that if you just simply evoke consequences for the illicit behavior, that will somehow change the behavior. And that has now, because now we have more of a harm reduction approach as opposed to a punitive approach, I think that is changing.
Yeah. It's
I
interesting
have
because
a
addiction. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
mm-mm.
Connor. Go ahead.
No, what I was going to ask is I know this is real sensitive to a lot of us. I know that before the
Mhm.
show we were discussing our own families and maybe relatives that might be close, might not be too close, but have you
Mhm.
had any of those issues in your personal life dealing with addiction? Because it sounds like you're bringing more to the table than book education. It sounds like you got a little heart beating in there for somebody that might have gone through something like this.
Well, that heart beating is my heart because
Okay.
I celebrated 20 years in recovery this year.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
Let's
so
Wow.
um,
Congratulations.
yes, thank you. Thankfully, I drugs were not my drug of choice, so to speak. It was alcohol. But I've been sober by the grace of God for 20 years, and been an active member of like Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery programs. And it's funny that I'm sharing this in a public forum, because I hadn't shared anything about being in recovery in the public until I became a mayor. I mean, folks who knew me knew about it, but it wasn't something that I broadcast. I wouldn't, do a post on Facebook or something about it. But how I became to actually disclose that in public is a lot of things that we do as a mayor. We'll do a proclamation for, say, Cancer Survivor Month, or in this particular instance, it was Recovery Month, and it was there to celebrate people who had been in recovery. And I was to read a proclamation. And as I started to read the proclamation, it occurred to me, I was like, I've never really said anything that, hey, the mayor's in recovery. Maybe folks should know that. So I finished reading the proclamation. I said, look, I have something to share that I'm this has touches me in a very deep way because I'm a member of that community. And if I can, by saying that I'm in recovery, can help another person, then that is what I've been told to do. And that's what I should do. And that's what I have to do to stay sober one day at a time, is to use my experience to help others. And so being a mayor gives you a particularly helpful platform for that.
That's really something to write home about. I mean, to be able to share that in the public media, especially as a public figure, I can imagine only the challenges, the anxiety that goes along with that. You know, addiction, whether
Yeah,
it's
it's huge.
alcohol or drugs, you know, it affects the brain's reward and the decision making systems in very remarkable similar ways. You know, both create a powerful physical dependence, there's psychological cravings, and the path to recovery essentially requires a lot of the same core elements. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but medical support, behavioral change, and even sustained community connection. And how can you connect with your community as a mayor if you're not transparent about what you've been through yourself, so that they understand that the projects that you stand behind, and even like our training that we're moving forward with in many capacities, that these are the types of things that you look for in order to be able to help that community and to stand by it. How could you proudly stand by it if you're not a part of it in that sense, or have a firm understanding about it?
Yes, I think,
I had a
yeah, go
I
ahead,
had
Connor.
a when you did this,
Like,
you're making it sound almost like just one equals two, two
nonchalant,
equals
yeah.
three. Yeah. But was there a moment you were, I mean, as it was coming out of your mouth? Because those are the experiences I learned from. When somebody
Yeah.
tells me their pain and how they fixed it, that means much more than reading something out of a book that says something's bad. But when you were delivering this, was it prepared, or did you just say, I'm gonna say who I am, this is it? And what was that like?
So it wasn't prepared. It was, I'm having these, if you could two competing voices in my head. One, hey, the rational person, is
Wonderful.
this a good idea? You know, being a mayor,
Yeah,
you're already subject to criticism all the time.
all of it. Yeah.
I've tried to wean myself off of looking at social media because of, people get behind a keyboard and go after you. But so there
Keyboard
was that part
gangsters.
of it. Is this a good idea? This is just ammunition that they could probably use against you. And that kind of rational lawyer was speaking. And then the other side was, wait, you were told that in recovery, the best way to stay sober is to help other people, right? Pass it on, right? That's the famous words that Bill Wilson, when he was stopped by someone, hey, Bill, what should I do? He said, pass it on. And, obviously what he meant by that is share the message. And so I had to share that message that day. And it felt kind of similar to the first day that I went to an AA meeting, where I was debating, should I go? Should I not go? Should I raise my hand, not raise my hand? And I raised my hand at that meeting, mustard seed in Philadelphia 20 some years ago. And that weight, gone. Same thing,
Yeah,
I
no,
think, with my
huge.
experience when I disclosed in a public session was, it's out there now. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the response was overwhelmingly positive. No one has come up to me and said, questioned it. I've had people thank me for it, and that makes it more accessible. It has a degree of empathy, and if it helps someone, then more power to it. Like, my own sense of embarrassment should not trump the ability to help another person, right? You have to weigh those things. And otherwise, that's selfish in my view. Is I'm going to keep it to myself because I'd rather spare myself the embarrassment than help another person.
Yeah,
So
that's
I think,
interesting. I, I think one of the things that I'm hearing is that there's this sense of an understanding that you have to recognize the addiction, you have to share what the addiction is about, and then you have to obviously, deal with the challenges, and face the addiction in a very public way. And I think triggers and access to, to these types of items like alcohol, like, fentanyl on the streets, that they're deeply intertwined in the perpetuation, obviously, and relapse of cycles of addiction, and triggers, whether internal, such as emotional distress, or external, such as an environmental cue, like being a public figure, can really activate the pathways that are associated with craving and the reward anticipation of addiction. So when you're, I guess one of the things that I want to know is, given your lived experience, how much of your struggle with addiction was tied to the ease of access when a craving or an emotional trigger hit? Because we go through, as humans, we go through everyday life. We have children, we have jobs, we have finances. All of these are triggers. Our relationships are triggers. So how do you think reducing access today, changing the environment, can play a role in, preventing relapse, for others? And then also, a kind of a piggyback off that is, as a public figure today, what do you see as the most urgent gaps in prevention and intervention right now?
Sure. So access, I mean, for me, it was alcohol. So alcohol is everywhere. It's in our
Piece
culture.
of cake.
It's
It's
like food.
accepted.
I eat everything all the time.
Yeah, and that's, and so for me, I think that's where recovery comes in, is that you want to get to a state of recovery, whereas my joke is, you could put me in a vat of alcohol and I wouldn't take a sip, right? That I'm in a spiritual place that it just doesn't affect me. Now that's me, but that's after 20 years of recovery. Now try to do that with someone who's on day one, and that it becomes obviously very difficult. And so access with respect to alcohol, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do anything about that. I wasn't going to move to a dry town.
It's beyond your control.
Yeah,
Like, there's
I
just
can't
nothing you can.
control access. That's a government function. That's all kinds of other things. And even with illicit drugs, they've tried and tried. There's still access everywhere, right? There's still ability to pick up that. And so what you have to do, I think, is focus on, so someone doesn't take the first drink, they don't take the first hit, they don't take the first shot, and focusing on that. And some of that is, so triggers can be shame, right? And I think as we've focused now more on the harm reduction side of addiction, and reducing the shame associated with it. And I know in Sparta, we focus on really on harm reduction. Obviously, if I mean, that's part of it. It's state mandated, right? We have the Overdose Prevention Act in New Jersey, probably like a lot of states, where if you call for medical assistance for an overdose, you're not going to get prosecuted for any kind of possession charge, right? If they will administer Narcan, they'll revive you, and then they'll put you in touch with like the Center for Prevention and Counseling, with people with experience in recovery, and try to get you help. And so that way, to sort of destigmatize it, that you were really suffering from a disease at that point, and we're trying to get you help for that. And so our officers are very well trained in that. And that's tremendously helped for, I think, a trigger, as a stigma can be a trigger for people. Shame is a trigger. And if you reduce some of the shame associated with it, and let people know that there's options for recovery and to get better, I think that's can be very helpful.
Yeah, I never when I have 4 years, 4 years and a couple months sober now. And those 17 years I was drinking, a lot of it was autopilot. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
just drank. I mean, I really didn't even need a good reason. It just made me feel better. And it just kind of took everything away. But it's that 3 o'clock heart palpitation in the morning from all that all the alcohol that your body's trying to deal with. And there's so much, but yeah, you're right. You get to that point, and sharing it like you have, especially in your position, that's a big win, and that's what keeps you going in that direction. Some people are just, when they mess up, they punish themselves so brutally, they never quit messing up, they never forgive themselves, they never. And it's like opiates too, you screw up, everybody messes up, but you
Mm-hmm.
gave yourself that chance, you forgave yourself. Sounds like there's a lot of self-love that you've learn how to obtain, because that's the hardest part. We're our worst critic.
Yes, and I think, you know, when I remember when they said, "Well, you have to forgive yourself," and that it took me a while to kind of
Yeah.
understand that. But I think the
Yes.
way forgiveness is an act, and one of the ways that you can forgive yourself is improving yourself, right? That sometimes in addicts will be they're so beaten down. They think they're incapable of ever getting better, ever living a life of so-called of their wildest dreams. You tell them that, and it doesn't make any sense to them. And I get why it doesn't, but eventually it does. And that the way you forgive yourself is trying to stay sober each day, trying to improve yourself and others. And that improvement itself becomes an actual act of forgiveness and atonement in a sense. So I try to, when I talk to people in recovery, I try to emphasize that enough about the self-flagellation. When you were in addiction, you were basically self-flagellation every day. So now let's put down the substance and start talking about self-improvement. And going to meetings and doing that is the way that they can do that, and way that they can atone for the mistakes that they made. So, and I think that's been helpful. I was fortunate enough that, as I tell, addiction is an elevator going down. Just decide what floor you want to get off on. And I got off on a floor before I caused too much damage to myself and others. But that's also, I knew where it was going, right? And you don't have to say, well, I need to do some more research of how far I can take this thing down. No, just get, if it's a problem in your life, get off.
It almost seems that fentanyl and opiates, bringing us back to that elevator's going a lot faster.
Yeah.
And that one,
Yes.
I've never partaken, but I do know what it's like to take Vicodin and start to really enjoy taking Vicodin. And, I
Reducing
know
your
what that's
pain.
like. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
then it started, and I'm addictive anyway. I mean, whatever I pick up, I don't stop. I mean, so I have to be very careful what I entertain, because I'll work myself into the middle of nowhere homeless all by myself. I'm easy like that. So I got to watch out.
We'll keep you
That's,
out of there, Connor. We'll keep you out. We'll keep,
Thanks.
we'll keep you out. And this leads me to a couple other questions. I'm curious from a policy perspective, as an elected official, and as well from a community application perspective. So from a leadership perspective, in terms of policy and prevention, how can local governments, in your opinion, balance respecting individual freedoms while also reducing high risk access points for substances that are driving these overdose rates and affecting the community in troves?
So I think, what we've done is, one, you have to look at it from a collaborative approach, right? That not just simply law enforcement. And that's what we've done in Sparta. We have basically a collaborative effort with our Center for Prevention and Counseling. And those are trained professionals in addiction recovery who almost work side by side our police officers. So if someone calls in for assistance for an overdose, that means, the police respond, they get Narcan. Well, the next thing that the police does is put that person in touch with someone from the Center for Prevention and Counseling, who then can assist that person. Hey, do you want to get help? Here's how, here's the resources. And so that's one way. And that's why overdoses have gone down in our county in particular. They attribute it to, Narcan availability, a much more collaborative approach with our prevention services. Also, just getting the word out that, and we're big on destigmatizing addiction. And not just approaching it from a punitive, criminal justice point. And I think that is what sort of municipalities have to realize, that addiction is a multifaceted problem. It requires a multifaceted solutions. There's no one size fits all. And
I think that,
go ahead. Yeah,
no,
that
I think that's
on
a
the
great
recovery
response.
side.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. And I think that leads into some of the elements in the program, the calm, assess, respond, engage approach. Not only is that solidified through law enforcement, but we apply the same strategic approach in first responders and also caseworkers and mental health. You brought
It's
up
all
the point.
uniform.
Yeah, you brought up the point. There are Department of Children and Family workers that are picking up children at the scene of an addiction site. It doesn't necessarily have to be a crime. It can be another, it could be an overdose. There's so many different parameters. And so the collaboration is really key. One of the reasons why we personally designed the program the way we did is so that we can have the same strategic approach across all 50 states. So that data visualization, those statistics of those actual reduction in arrests, those policy changes that are going into effect are actually legitimate. They are accurate because as you look at it now, what we don't know what other departments are doing across the nation. And so having a social media volume like this and being able to have a platform like this where we can see the same challenges across the nation, it also allows us to come up with systemic community action that is collaborative across all those different, public safety sectors. Um, Knowing what you know about addiction, knowing what you know as an elected official, knowing what you know about how you've dealt with this, in terms of community application, clearly the program that we have is hitting New Jersey like wildfire. It's now all over Maryland, Georgia. Just yesterday, we had overcommitments of 950 officers in Missouri. I mean, we are really taking this program by storm in under 8 months, hitting thousands and thousands of law enforcement officers and first responders, et cetera. Are there any training or community protocols that maybe you feel have not been implemented as just in your line of sight and experience when you've seen? I know you're not on those scenes on a regular basis, but things you might have heard from your own chiefs and your own personnel and EMS and first responders, or even other elected officials that you can identify that you think will disrupt these trigger access cycles, and what would you want to see included so that we could take that back as well and enhance what we've already done with new curriculum in the future?
Sure. I think one thing that, and this is beyond the challenge of law enforcement, but really looking at addiction and the triggers for relapse that go beyond just simply a law enforcement approach or even our those in counseling, but something as simple as transportation, right? That a big issue that we live in a more rural county in New Jersey. We don't have access to public transportation or even as many Ubers and Lyfts as other towns. And so that creates a challenge for someone who wants to stay sober, needs to get to a meeting, but hey, maybe they don't have a driver's license or that it's under suspension, trying to get transportation for them. So there's where I see a deficiency is sort of you need to broaden out a little bit, or what are those things that those in the recovery community, what could help them stay sober, right? What are the things that they need to not relapse? And it can be as simple as simply transportation to and from meetings. There's other things like we have taken some of our opioid recovery funds and put that into a food pantry, because food insecurity is also could be a trigger for people, and that can help people in our recovery community. And so I think you have to kind of broaden out, or where I see a deficiency is people need to think more about the recovered person a little more and what that person needs. I get that we want to prevent someone from taking the first drink. We need to deal with the person who's in crisis at that moment. But how do we sustain recovery over time? And what are those things that people in the recovery community need to maintain long-term sobriety beyond simply meetings? How can we assist that person? I think that's where I see some additional work needs to be done.
I think
That's
that's a really valuable point.
Yeah, well, it's like any recovery. So I dropped a lot of fat at one time. It's after you drop the fat, after you get to a point, yeah, then what do you do next? How do you keep it? How do you retain it? How do you take care of it? Because that eating has triggers, opiates have triggers, alcohol, whatever addiction is, there's triggers there. I think that's brilliant. What can we do to help sustain people and keep them on a path? And yeah, transportation, just having a ride to get to the meeting, to talk to other people that are helping you, that's invaluable. Yeah, that's really brilliant. I remember with the police department, we had training on how to arrest people under the influence. That was the thing. We didn't give a crap what happened after. We just take them, put them in jail. That was it. There was nothing else. And if they got deferment, if they got this, if they got that, that was their problem. But the world's a much more complicated place than that. And these drugs, they're so addictive from very first test, very first touch. these programs. I wish we would have had this program when I was in the academy or at any time during my 20 years with the department. I had to go get extra training and it still didn't address it like the program that's being offered. It's amazing because it really connects a person on a much deeper level than just let's take the bad guy to jail. And in fact, the bad guy, that's a lot of these poor folks. You said it at the beginning, Mayor. You mentioned, you talked about addiction. You know, a lot of times it's you almost can't help it. Yeah, you do that, take that first step, but after that, it's that one, you're done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so, and that low point I think is so hard to climb out of for so many. And that's kind of why we see this cycle of addiction for those that are incarcerated. They go in, we're treating them in these what we call de facto treatment centers. Jails have become treatment centers. It's costing counties and cities a ton of money to do this, to maintain this. They're getting minimal resources, right? Because they're, as far as everybody else is concerned, they're an incarcerated criminal. They're not necessarily a person. And so with a human emotion that needs to understand addiction and fight it and get the resources to do that. So now that person comes back out, right? Now there's this reincarceration cycle. 35-40% of these people are going back in. Now it's costing taxpayers even more dollars and cents. It's costing more time for LEOs to go back out into the field, first responders to go back out into the field to treat the same situation. And we're not solving the problem. We're just perpetuating it. We're access to other resources and de-escalating the situation, both from an LEO perspective, where they're able to see the person for who they are, using empathy, using it for themselves. How many, I mean, you were an LAPD retired officer, Connor. How many times did you get burnout? How many times did you say, gosh, I need a break? I mean, and maybe you didn't resort to addiction, but it's very easy for somebody
Oh,
to do that,
absolutely.
you know?
Yeah.
And so here we are back in that cycle all over again. It's so great to have people like Mayor Clark here because he's reinforcing not just the challenges from his own experience, but what it looks like from, the political perspective, as well as, the frontline officers when you're at the scene and whatnot. It's really an interesting dialogue to see the collaboration that's needed, because it was really underfunded and it really wasn't a collaboration for so many years. And I think we're trying to change that stigma, right, Connor?
Absolutely. And it's interesting what a miracle that would be. It's like having a sponsor in the alcohol world. Somebody actually picks you up, hey Connor, how you doing? How's everything going today? How you feeling? I don't know if that even exists in the fentanyl and the opiate world. What a weird thing that would
Absolutely.
be. Hey Johnny, you feeling okay? I mean, how's your day going? I'm just calling. You want to go out and get a coffee? You want to go take a walk in the, what a weird thing that would be. There's none of that.
Yeah, that
Well, it's
camaraderie.
interesting you say that, Connor, because we have something similar to that. So, talking with our police officers, so I told you about the Overdose Prevention Act, where if you call for medical assistance, they're not going to prosecute you. Well, let's say you get picked up on a drug charge, simple possession. You didn't call, you weren't overdose. Well, what we do actually, our police officers will actually reach out to that person along with someone from our Center for Prevention and Counseling and say, hey, do you need help? We saw that you just got picked up for, whatever possession charge or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, hey, we're here to, further prosecute you. Hey, it sounds like you may need some help and we're here to offer it for you. So it's almost, you are getting that kind of phone call from someone
Oh my
who is
gosh.
offering a helping hand, even though you've been, on the wrong end of law enforcement. That doesn't mean, that's just a step to hopefully get you to recovery, right? That, listen, we do have
Yeah.
to prosecute crimes, but don't understand, we're not just doing it for its own sake, because it doesn't help anyone if, as Dr. Levy pointed out, we incarcerate, you come back out, and the cycle continues. And so we have
That's
to
right.
be focused on getting that person recovered. And I think
Yeah.
when you destigmatize it, you say, hey, I'm here to help you, not just to be a police officer trying to arrest you and, get you, move on to the next thing, that I actually care about you as a human being. And that's getting conveyed, I think, to some folks. And I think that's hopefully part of the reason why we've seen overdoses going down, at least in our county.
Mhm.
And I think nationwide now, it's starting to trend downward.
Yeah. I
Nothing
think
like
so.
empathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And
Good.
first of all, I want to thank you so much for sharing such a candid and thoughtful perspective. Your journey and your leadership really do bring a rare, important voice to this conversation. It's not very often that we can get, elected officials in front of the nation to share things like this. It is a difficult feat. I'm sure when you did it the first time in that proclamation, there was a fear. There was a fear of how the public would respond, and to see that at the highest level, we have people all over, from elected officials to your mom and dad going to the grocery store that have addiction cycles, to the babysitter, to the teacher, to the fireman himself. It's really interesting to see how we can kind of culminate and pull this all together. So what you described today about triggers and access and community support and a coordinated response, I think is exactly what Fentanyl on the Front Line is designed to address. This podcast, the Frontline Briefing. And so our goal is really to make sure that law enforcement, first responders, educators, and community leaders all have the tools to act quickly, effectively, as well as compassionately. And that might be a simple ride to an AA meeting, or it might be something much more deep and more penetrable within, their community. So I, wholeheartedly thank you for your contributions here today. And Connor, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about the training, that the no cost and the high impact, and how they can access it, and things of that nature. That would be an excellent opportunity. And I'm sure Mayor Clark is open to any follow-up questions as well that may come from communities.
Absolutely. What we'll do is one of the things I wanted to mention, Mayor, when you took this training and started implementing it, what were some of I know that we were all given a chance to look at it, review it, and what I love about it is it's able to be modified. When there's something new that comes out, Dr. Levy and her staff just very quickly are able to implement a good idea into it.
And part of what we have to do on a municipal level is fund some of this, which is we have to say, look, there's certain training that our officers can get, because they really are on the front lines of it. As you know, as a former police officer, it's your call that's getting when there's an overdose or some criminal incident that's involving this. And so what I learned was really they've become very much informed about what addiction is, what the science behind it. I think they understand how to de-escalate a situation. Has become very important
Critical.
with that. And so they've gotten a tremendous amount of training on that, where they are not viewed as, so skeptically anymore. They're viewed as, look, we are in partners in helping you get well and helping you move beyond your addiction. And I think that's helped tremendously in a lot of the training that they've gotten through, various, including yours probably. That has been tremendously helpful, and they speak very positively about it.
Yeah, and I think today's conversation reminds us also that addiction doesn't discriminate. It can touch anyone at any stage of life. Your journey clearly brings struggle to leadership and shows that it's possible when communities rally together to support each other, when barriers to help are lowered, and when people are given the tools to respond with both urgency and compassion, that we can achieve great things. And the fentanyl crisis is really something that's moving fast. There's new drugs every day. I heard so many stories about how they cook their child's artwork that has powder in the jail systems, and they put it on a radiator, and they create this fentanyl type of high for them. I mean, it's I always say, if they would put that much energy into other things in society, we'd have so much more success. But it's moving faster than even most communities can react. And Jersey's a great example of officers that have been taking our training and combating this crisis quite critically. Fentanyl on the front line is about changing that. It's about giving our law enforcement, our first responders, our educators, our leaders, the knowledge and the readiness they need to save lives before it's too late. And even for new recruits that are coming in, they're now able to get a sense of what's to come and how they will need, to act and react in situations where those officers that have been dealing with this for a long time kind of had to learn, along the way. And so the program, I met with just last week. I was in Georgia meeting with some commissioners, and I met with a major there, and he started the Second Chance program in his state, where those that are incarcerated can actually go out and get jobs and whatnot, and really be successful moving away from fentanyl and moving more so in the face of having lives and a career and living again. And I think that the program, obviously, which comes at no cost to the agencies, it's all covered through the opioid funds, as you know, it not just saves lives, but it spares families from crisis, and it creates a future protection that's beyond measure. And having persons like yourself join us in this fight not only allows people to share their stories from the depths of their own personal loss, but it allows for triumph of survival and change. And that's something that we are advocating for here, which is change. Connor, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Mayor Clark, it really is nice to have this connection with you, having you taken the time to come onto the program. And I can understand why you got elected to the position you're in. You're just you're genuine. There's no additives, no preservatives. You're just you, and truly a blessing for our show today. And we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you
Well,
so
it's been my
much.
pleasure. And I'll simply leave you with just a small story that
Please.
I hope will encourage people to continue this fight, which is, so about a couple years ago, one of our police officers got a call and said, "Hey, there's someone at the dispatch that wants to see you." And what's that about? He goes out and sees a gentleman there, maybe in his mid-20s, and he can't really recognize the guy. And the officer goes out thinking he's going to have to do a police report or something like that. And the guy says, "No, I'm not here for that. I'm here because 2 years ago, I overdosed, and your officers administered Narcan, saved my life, and then put me in touch with the Center for Prevention and Counseling. I got recovered, and I've been sober for a couple years. I'm going to law school, and I'd like to make a donation to your junior police academy as a thank you for saving my life and putting it on the right path." And I think that's
Wow.
the message there is that's what we can do. We're saving lives and we're improving lives. And that I think can be the motivation for officers who, like you, are seeing it day after day after day. And why, am I just pushing the boulder up the hill every day and it falls back down?
Yeah.
No, I know how it feels that way, but there are gentlemen out there just like that who are now improving their lives, are contributing to society because we're helping them, we're destigmatizing it, we're giving them the support that they need. And I think that can be the motivation to fight what kind of feels like, I'm sure, a never-ending battle and a futile one sometimes.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Mayor Clark,
Sure.
Dr. Levy, both of you. I appreciate us
Same.
coming together again to
Mhm.
talk about this crisis. Definitely.
This is absolutely wonderful. Thank you again, Mayor. I look forward to
Sure.
more collaborations with you, to training more of your officers, and for getting this across the nation, how it needs to be. And it starts with individuals like yourself. So I appreciate your candidacy as well as your participation.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to today's Fentanyl on the Front Line podcast. I will have all of the links to the program embedded wherever you see this video. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. And please tell a friend and like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one, everybody. I'm Connor with Honor. Over and out.